Welcome to episode number 58 of the Barbell Lifestyle Podcast, where Christina and I discuss how to avoid making critical mistakes in goal setting for 2022. We go over how to set appropriate goals, how it ties into your success long-term in achieving those goals, and how to deal with setbacks, slumps, and how to really put yourself on the line and take action in 2022 if you lack motivation. As always, if you like the podcast and you want to support it, all we ask is that you share this episode with a friend, family member, or coworker who would benefit from it. One share can go a really long way and supports our mission to help as many people as possible to live a healthier, sustainable lifestyle. Finally, we would love you even more than we already do if you took the time to leave us a rating and review on iTunes. Ratings and reviews are how this podcast moves up the ranks and becomes accessible to even more people. Thanks again for listening, and we hope you enjoyed this episode number 58, Avoiding Goal-Setting Mistakes in 2022.
Hey guys, and welcome back to another episode of the Barbell Lifestyle Podcast. I'm your host, Christina Lynn, and I'm here with my co-host, Marissa Roy. And in today's episode, we're going to be talking about goal setting.
Yes, ma'am. And this is the second episode of 2022, which is crazy. It's still 2021 when we're recording this. But I think we said it at the end of the last episode, but if you didn't get to that point, Happy New Year. But yeah, I'm excited because I feel like there's a lot of easy mistakes to avoid when it comes to goal setting, especially with the new year. I feel like the dialogue around New Year's and New Year's resolutions has changed so much in the past couple of years, or maybe past decade. I feel like it used to be like everyone was gung-ho, good energy, like let's do this January 1. And now it's kind of like, especially with my clients that check in, I don't know if you've been experiencing this week since it's the last week of the year, but everyone's been like, I'm not like a resolutioner person, but like I kind of want to like start off my new year on a good foot. And so there's like this resistance to setting goals. And then there's like, but I still want to set these goals anyways. And so do you have that?
Yeah. So I feel like there's been a little shift. And I feel like a lot of it has to do with social media, to be completely honest, because
Totally.
I feel like before it was like, yeah, like New Year's resolutions, like set all these goals, like, and now it's like, goal setting doesn't actually work. And so everyone's like, oh, I'm anti-goal setting now. But
yeah,
I still like it regardless, because I think that there's just something new about starting a brand new year and kind of like leaving the old behind and starting fresh. I mean, it's kind of like starting a new month. Like there's just something nice about having some sort of like reset or refresh. And so if you do have any sort of feelings like that, then use that momentum. Like, why not? Like, why not try to have a better year? So I'm really all for them, but of course, as long as you're setting them and then being intentional about them. So that's my only caveat.
Yeah, I think a big part of the line there, I like your comparison with the first of the month and everything, because like I love starting new months, because from a business standpoint, you know, we'll close out the month, do payroll, blah blah blah, and then it's like, okay, clean slate, like all my, you know, bills are paid off or whatever, and I'm just kind of starting fresh this month. That's how I kind of look at it, like financially, business wise. And like it's exciting to start a new month in that aspect. We have new clients that come on every month. Like it's a good energy. So like the first of the year is just kind of like that for me. And I think the biggest thing that I would say in terms of a mistake not to make would be like, let's not use the end of a month or the end of a year as an excuse of like, oh, I'm going to start January 1st. Like I'm just going to, you know, throw in the towel until then. Like, obviously we don't want to use it as an excuse, and we're not going to use it as a like procrastination point. I think that is totally counterproductive, because we can always be working towards our goals no matter what day or month it is. But at the same time, it's like, use the good energy, but don't like turn it into a reason to have bad energy, I guess, would be one thing I think a lot of people do in December. And fortunately, you know, I've been talking to a lot of people who've been action takers in December, which has been so motivating, a lot of our clients. But at the same time, it's like we want to make sure that we're really perpetuating that good energy. And I like to look at it as building momentum, really.
Yeah. And I think it's really important because it's not like, oh, well, the new year is coming up, so I'm not going to do anything in December or I can't make any progress because I'm just going to wait. I definitely agree. But instead of being anti-goal setting or whatever, it's like if you can use at least a little bit of momentum going into the new year, I think absolutely capitalize on that.
Absolutely. And I think, we'll be past December at this point, but something I've been reminding a lot of our people, our clients, and just in general, myself too, is like, even if December, we don't take a ton of steps forward, like we're still in a way better place than if we had just like totally thrown it out the window. So like end of any month, end of any year, keep that perspective in mind of like, sometimes just not going backwards is still great progress, especially if you compare it to years past. I think one thing that I've seen a lot in a lot of our clients this year is like, okay, maybe the scale didn't go down in December. Like maybe they just held steady, but maybe the year prior before they had coaching or, advice on this, they like ballooned up 10 pounds in December because of the holidays. Right. And so it's like, how are we looking at it that way? So I think just hindsight perspective, again, not using the end of the year as an excuse to go backwards. But, today just want to talk about how do we continue to build on that positive momentum, set goals that are going to set us up for that, and how to stay focused and avoid setbacks once we do get rolling. Because I think beyond setting goals, I think like that's pretty straightforward of like, okay, we have this formula, we can set these good goals. But then when it comes to like getting down to it and achieving them, I feel like the first 2 weeks is like gung ho. And then once we get into that lull period of week like 3, 4, 5, 6, we're like, oh God, like I'm not motivated for this. Like, how do we avoid those slumps, those setbacks, and how do we stay focused as we go into the rest of the year?
Yeah. So I think it's a really good way that we want to take this episode. So, hopefully you're not like, oh, well, I don't want to listen to another goal setting podcast, or, we're not going to spend a whole lot of time, but I think it is really important to touch on how to set correct goals, or how to like this like formula for better goals, I should say, not correct ones, but better. But then like, it's kind of like, okay, well, now that I have them, now what? Like, now what do I do? So again, we are very much want to have everyone, all of our listeners walk away with actionable steps and, some good takeaways. So that's really what we're going to focus on too within this episode.
Yeah. Awesome. So yeah, I think the best place to start when it comes to our formula with setting goals is kind of like, what mistakes are we trying to avoid? So I think just to list them off the top of my head, some of the biggest mistakes I see with New Year's resolutions and goals in general is they're either too broad, they're too rigid, or they're just too much. And I think we want to avoid all three of those things. And as we get into how do we write up these goals, how do we make them tangible, we'll get into how to avoid those traps, I think.
Yeah. So kind of more like, we don't want them to be subjective. We want them to be a little bit more objective. So like if your goals are to have abs, well, what exactly does that mean? Or I want to be healthy. What does that mean? How do you measure that? So, I guess we can just kind of dive right in, because I feel like the SMART goals kind of cover all of those things. So kind of like what Marissa said, like SMART goals. So the first component is S, so specific. So like, what exactly do you want to do? Like, what are your goals? And we don't want them to be too broad, and we don't want them to be too vague. So again, something like, I want to get healthy versus something like, I want to be able to increase my workouts from 1 to 2 times a week, or I want to eat 1 serving of vegetables at dinner, 5 times a week, something like that. So you're making them more specific, or instead of like, I want to get healthier, I want to lose weight, like I want to lose 10 pounds. Like you're setting something that it's a little bit more concrete, and not just too broad.
Yeah. Tangible for sure. I think it's fun. Like we use the example, I want to get healthy this year, like because it's so common, but when I think about it, and obviously like Christina and I are professionals in this industry, so we're going to look at this from a nuanced perspective. So, but what healthy might mean to you could be completely different than what healthy might mean to me. And the way that we use the word healthy oftentimes is almost like just a mask or like a word to describe something that we haven't really thought all the way through yet. So healthy for one person who maybe they're overweight or obese might be getting their blood work in normal ranges. It might be, losing 5% of their body weight so that they can, eliminate joint pain when they're walking or running. It could be something as simple as that, right? And then another person might use the term healthy to describe all organic, non-GMO eating, and shopping at the grocery store and making sure that they're staying in line with paleo or keto dietary guidelines. Like, we literally use the word healthy to describe like a bazillion different things. And I think a big part of that is we just don't think all the way through our goals. So I know Christina does this. I know I do this. When we're talking with new clients and we're defining these goals, we are basically just, and I challenge you listening to this podcast to do this exercise as well. We basically just push you layer after layer, like peeling an onion. Like, okay, so what's your goal? I want to get healthy. Okay, well, what does that mean? I want to lose 10 pounds. Okay, well, what do those 10 pounds look like? Like, is it a pant size? Is it a way that you feel when you look in the mirror? Like, we dig all the way down and figure out, like, what does that mean? And that's what we mean by specific, because, and we'll get into measurable, timely, and all those things and putting those numbers, metrics on things. But like, specific means you have to actually understand what you're saying when you say your goal. Because if I can ask the question back and say, well, okay, that's pretty vague. Like, what does that mean? Then you haven't gone far enough. And so, a specific goal might be in 2022, I want to be able to look in the mirror in a bathing suit and feel really, really confident at my trip to Cabo in July. And I want to do all of the things with my training and nutrition that are going to get me there. And then we can take a look at like the metrics that help get us to that point. But like, that is specific. You could also take that exact goal, that exact description, and say, I want to be healthier. Or I want to feel healthier and like have literally no idea what you mean by that. So that's something that I wanted to like harp on for a little.
Yeah. I mean, so you and I are super annoying when we're talking with clients. We're like, what does that look like? Like, well, what does that feel like? So we definitely go into that, but it's like, okay, so like thinking about your goals, like, who's involved, what exactly are you looking to accomplish? Like, where is this going to take you? Why is it important to you? Like, what are the resources involved? So again, just really thinking about your goals rather than these like blanket statements. So that's specific. So we'll move on to measurable, because again, I think this might actually be like, in my opinion, one of those overlooked when it comes to goal setting, because it's like, again, I want to be healthy. Well, how do you know when you've reached it? So M stands for measurable. So like, how are you going to track your goal? So how do you know if you've gotten healthy? So like Marissa was saying earlier, like, oh, I want to lower my cholesterol into the normal range, or I want to, take, supplements, or I want to lose 10 pounds in, in the next 2-3 months or something like that. So how do you track it? And so I think, again, it's just super important to have a very clear idea or like specific numbers or like a timeline. So it'll just really help you assess whether or not you've reached your goals. And also, another thing that's really important about this is like you can track it, so you can know how close you are, how far you are. And it's just a component that, again, I really think is overlooked, but is super important. So, instead of like, oh, I want to increase my NEAT, or I want to walk more. So like, I will begin walking 3 times a week for 10 minutes a day. Like something like that is way more, measurable, and like, something that one of my clients just did was she shared in our group this Excel spreadsheet where it was like a habit tracker. So she had specific habits that she wanted to do daily, and she could check them off because, again, measurable, like, oh, I want to walk more. So like, oh, did I walk around today? Oh, yep, check. Versus like, oh, I went outside and I walked for 10 minutes today, so I get to check it off. So I love the M component of SMART goals.
Yeah, no, I love that. I think overlooked, but also because the measurable aspect like bleeds so far into the process rather than just like sitting there and setting the goal. Like the measurable part is really a part of the entire process. I have a great example for this, actually. We had a client who she was probably I don't want to butcher this, but maybe 230 pounds or so at the beginning of her journey with us. And it's only been like 8 to 10 weeks and she's already lost like 15, 16 pounds, which is like, hello, like that's amazing. Like that is more than a pound a week on a particularly like not a super tall frame either. And so the problem was she felt very discouraged the entire time. Even though she was losing weight, her weight graph was like a very steep slope downwards. And we just couldn't, for a little bit, we couldn't figure out why she was discouraged because we were like, hey, look at this. But we were lacking something measurable along the way through the process in the initial goal setting. And I think the expectations were not set at the beginning. So we had to kind of revisit that and reset those in order for her to actually feel motivated. So this is kind of looking down the road of like, how do you stay focused? How do you avoid setbacks? So basically we took a step back and we said, okay, well, we acknowledged the fact that you have made progress. And she was like, yes, I know that. And I am happy with that. I just feel like I have so far to go. So then we just broke it down. We said, let's try to lose 5 pounds a month. And we just said, let's try to lose 5 pounds a month. Like it's a little over a pound per week. It's around the same, rate that you've been losing. And let's just try to do that every single month and stay focused on that instead of how much you have to go because, 60, 70 pounds is so daunting. And after a year, 5 times 12 is what? 72? Probably. Math is hard. But, no, it's 60.
Yeah, I was going to say, I don't think that's right.
Sorry, I was going with 6. Because I used the example of 5 to 6 pounds with someone else. But, okay, so 5 times 12 is 60. Great. That's public on air. But in a year, you'll have lost 60 pounds. Like that's incredible, right? But if we stay focused on the 60 pounds, we're going to be paralyzed by how daunting that goal seems. So we just broke that down. Literally the next week, her check-in said, I feel so on track with my short and long-term goals. Like she was so excited. And it wasn't even a change in what was happening. It was just the goal and the expectations around it because we put something measurable that she could compare to on a month-to-month basis. So I think that is a great example of where having something measurable that you can check off, like, okay, each week I've lost 1.25 pounds, like on average, that is a great thing. And, using weight as that metric is not the best for everybody, but that's just one example of how that can totally flip your mindset around.
Yeah, so that's a super great example. And again, how do we apply these goals and how do we make it so you can stay on track? So when it comes to, again, SMART goals, we're on to A. So A is achievable. So like, is it in your power to accomplish this goal? So again, big dichotomy here. You want to make sure that it's not too easy, but your goals aren't too challenging. So goals that are too easy can lead to low levels of effort. So like, oh, it's not that big of a deal. So like, whatever, I'm just not even going to do it. Versus goals that are too difficult can result in frustration. So being like you were just saying, like, oh, I have all this weight to lose. It seems so daunting. So I'm just going to give up versus breaking it down and making it a little bit more realistic. And it feels more achievable and in control. So again, you really want to find this balance between ease and difficulty. And, I think it's really important that you take into consideration like your abilities, your resources, your commitment as far as like time. And, if you have a family of 10 kids and you think that you're going to be able to dedicate 5 hours a day to the gym, like, well, it's, probably not that likely. So, instead of being frustrated with like, oh, I can only spend 30 minutes at the gym, it's like, well, what can we do with those 30 minutes, and trying to kind of flip it and be like, it's probably, it's better than not going at all. And, also considering your resources, like, I want to get healthy and I want to lose weight. Well, if you can't spend $10,000 on a personal trainer, like, again, like taking into consideration your finances, like what is something that you actually can invest in? So, and I think it's important when you're at this stage, you're thinking about like, what are some obstacles or constraints that might get in the way of my goal? So you're already kind of being proactive about what might stop you from reaching them and kind of tackling them right then and there before it happens. So that's one of the things I really, again, I mean, I like all components, but this aspect as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's funny because you see the motivational memes all over Instagram, and it's like, your goals should terrify you, and like if they don't terrify you, they're not big enough, and like. Yes.
Okay, Pinterest.
Yeah, but I feel like just being realistic about your context, and I think we should set big goals that scare us. I think that's important because we're getting out of our comfort zone. Discomfort forces growth and change, and positive change for that matter. So yes, I think your goals should scare you, maybe even terrify you, but how do we actually put those things into digestible action steps that are achievable? And so let's say the bigger goal is absolutely terrifying. Like maybe it's I'm talking with a client today who she's getting ready to do her first ever contest prep. And so she's pretty terrified because she's like, oh my God, I'm nervous. Like, this is scary. I really want to do this, but like, it's a lot, right? And so I basically broke that down for her, and I was like, the first probably 3 months are going to feel like a normal fat loss phase. So like, let's just focus on that. And even beyond that, I want you to just focus on like, what do you have in front of you today? If you can keep that focus in front of you today, like, you are going to be so successful, because that's what's going to get you through the hard days. And so I think, it's about, if you do have those big goals that scare you, then, make sure you break them up into smaller actionable steps and logical steps that are in your power to accomplish. Because, again, if we look at the bigger goal, we're always going to be intimidated. We're going to be paralyzed by the thought of it. So we want to make sure that we're taking into consideration what we can do now to move forward towards it. And then, like, again, being realistic about, like, what is absolutely not achievable or, can't be a part of your lifestyle. Like, always context. Context is so important. But I think, how do we view achievable? I think it's very easy to come up with an excuse of, like, oh, this is not achievable right now, so therefore I shouldn't even bother pursuing it. Like, no, this is not an excuse to do that. It's just like, let's make sure what we have in front of us is achievable and is working us towards that bigger end goal.
Yeah, I love that. So when we get into R is relevant. So just kind of like, are these goals relevant to you? So we're not going to spend a whole lot of time on this, but it's basically just, you need to make sure that your goals align with your values and your priorities and, what's going to be worthwhile to you, and also kind of relate to your other core goals. So I think that's kind of important too, is like thinking about how all of your goals kind of like are intertwined and how they can relate to one another. And, just making sure that it's not a goal that you're setting because someone else thinks that you should do it. So, we always go back to not comparing yourself to other people and just focusing on you. So that's kind of that's really the whole part of R. And I don't feel like there's really anything else to kind of talk about, but just kind of like finding your why and what's going to make you show up and take action every single day. Like, what motivates you?
Well, I think I do have something to add, actually. I think on the, like, concept of alignment, what's important to you, what's relevant to you. Like, I want to dig a little bit deeper into that, because, like, there are a lot of situations where we run into people who feel like they should lose fat or they should lose weight, maybe because their family comments on their weight or their body, or they have insecurities around it, or maybe just because they see people on social media going into a fat loss phase January 1st. Like, literally, there is so much external pressure So my challenge to you, I'm going to give you exercises as you're listening to this. So write them down. But, first with the specific, peel the layers on, what is actually that goal? What does that mean to you? And then in terms of relevance and alignment with that goal, do you want it? Or does someone else want it for you? And like, is this really your vision for yourself? And make sure that is first and foremost what's set in stone, because if it's not for you, you're not going to find yourself taking action towards it. You're going to find yourself out of alignment. You're not going to be taking action. You're going to be wondering why you're messing up or you're off plan. And it's just going to turn into a vicious cycle of self-sabotage, guilt, shame, because you were never in alignment in the first place. But if we had just acknowledged that, then we wouldn't have even gone down the wrong path. So I think that's something I wanted to add on relevant.
Yeah, no, I love it. That was a good point. So T is timely. So wrapping up our SMART goals. So again, bringing it back to measurable. So when do you want to accomplish your goal by? So you want to have some sort of specific date or time frame in mind. It's kind of almost like a deadline if you think about it. So as we've talked about before with deadlines, they should help motivate you to take action because you've got a little stress, a little bit of pressure. But again, when we go back to being specific, like if you have 60 pounds to lose, well, we're probably not going to do that in 1 to 2 months. As much as you might like, it's not realistic. So making sure that it is, again, it's not too challenging, but it's also not giving yourself so much time where you have no stress and you don't care and you don't take any action. So, I think this is kind of where we've talked about before, like coming up with our short and long-term goals. Like, I really like this idea. It's like long-term goals tell you where you're going, but the short-term goals tell you how to get there. So kind of like Marissa was saying earlier, it's like we have this huge goal, but how am I going to lose 60 pounds in a year? That is so overwhelming, so daunting. Like if we break it down and focus, okay, well, month to month, it should look like 5 pounds a month. Makes it a little bit more achievable and you'll still have something that you're working towards every single day. So I really like this because as we've referenced this podcast so many times, but the MSCEO project when it comes to the power list. So it's like, again, we have these huge goals that maybe scare the shit out of us. And there's our explicit for the day. But it's like, okay, well now I have this huge goal and maybe this is what I want to accomplish in all of 2022. So let's say this is my 12-month goal. So let's break it down into, 6 months, where should I be? 3 months, where should I be? 1 month, where should I be? And then it's like, all right, well, what are those action steps that I need to take every single day that get me closer and closer to my overarching goal? So I really like, again, I like all components. I'm a huge nerd when it comes to this, mostly because I did this all throughout schooling for counseling. So, but it's something that I really like.
I love it. No, I think the only thing I have to add with timely is what adding a deadline does for people. And that is, it adds a sense of urgency, because if we don't have a deadline, we could, work on this later. We could procrastinate. We could start tomorrow, right? But ultimately, when we put a deadline on it, we're putting a sense of urgency on things. And I mean, how many, like, if I were talking on this podcast and instead of the number of listeners that we had, that listen asynchronously, if we had you all in an auditorium and I asked you all, how many of you guys consider yourselves procrastinators with work or deadlines? Like every single freaking person is going to raise their hand. Like it's just a thing. There are very few people who like take pride in not procrastinating. And what we're going to do basically is we're going to wait until that last second or maybe, and then we're in a position where we're 2 months away from our wedding and then we need to crash diet, right? It always happens that way. So when we put a deadline on something, we're creating a sense of urgency and we're giving ourselves a reason to do this now. One really good example of this is, like I said, Christina and I, we dig into the why, we ask really annoying questions. And one of the questions I like to ask people is like, hey, why is it important to you that you don't delay taking action on this goal? And one of the most common answers that I get, and this is no shade on this answer, it's a good answer, but I feel like it's kind of the answer that people feel like they should give rather than like a real one. So here's the answer I get, and I promise this will come around full circle. but they say, my mom or my dad has pre-diabetes or diabetes, or they're overweight, or they're suffering with health consequences right now. And, I don't want to look 30 years down the road and have that be me. Now, that is a great reason to want to change your life now and take action on it now. But the problem with it is it puts no sense of it puts a little bit, but no real sense of urgency on taking action now. Because if it's 30 years down the road, you could totally start tomorrow. And so what I do is I'm like, okay, well, first, that is a good goal. I want you to know that I do respect that goal and that reason, but it's not going to get you up off the couch today. It's not going to do it today. It's not going to do it tomorrow. It might do it in 10 or 15 years, but is that how long you want to wait before you start, right? So then I push you again, go deeper than that. What is the real reason that you want to take action, and what is going to get you off the couch today? And let's put that sense of urgency on something, because, if we don't, we just work better under pressure. A lot of people do. And it just gives us a sense of okay, I need to check these boxes today. Otherwise I'm not getting there. And we get so much more accomplishment out of that. So I really like, everything that comes along with timely. That might be my personal favorite, because, just putting, tangible timelines on things really does help 99% of people get to wherever they want to go faster and with more ease.
Yeah. And I love being able to break things down into realistic steps. I think that's, there are so many important components, but, but I really like being able to shrink some things down. So, when it comes to actually setting your goals, I feel like step one is brainstorm. So just kind of brain dump, get them all out there, everything you could possibly think of in span of 5 to 10 minutes. And then step two is kind of all right, let's break them down. Let's do those long-term, midterm, short-term goals, daily habits that you need to take. And then step three, I think, is okay, well, write your goals down. Tell your friends, have someone that's going to keep you accountable towards your goals. Do a vision board, post them on social media, whatever it needs, whatever you need to do to make your goals more concrete. Because if you're talking about them, if you're writing them down, if you're visualizing and you're referencing them, it's not you're not going to be oh, well, I'm just going to put this in a piece of paper and then fold it up and revisit it at the end of 2022 and see what I did to get there. So I like the Excel tracker, or having something that you're going to continuously reference to see, am I on track? Am I making progress? And I think also, Marissa and I are very big components of being able to visualize. And so what does your life look like once you've accomplished these goals? How are you going to feel? How is your life going to be different? What new qualities would you have as a person? How are you going to show up differently? But I really like the idea of putting them out into the universe rather than kind of keeping them to yourself. Now, of course, there are some things you probably don't want everyone on the internet to know. You can keep a few of those things to yourself, but you're so much more likely to show up and take action if you put things out. So maybe, a goal for 2022 is to run a Tough Mudder or compete in a bikini competition, or, whatever it might be. If you put it out there, it's kind of oh shit, now I have to. So again, it's kind of it goes along the idea of having a deadline. That if you put it out there, you're going to have people be hey, weren't you going to do this? And you're yes. So I really like that idea. And also just being able to constantly revisit your goals all the time.
Yeah, there's a lot from that that I was writing notes on. So a couple of things. The likelihood of success when you state your goals, you put things out into the world. I'm not the person that's going to sit here and be the universe will manifest whatever you declare to it. No, you have to put your work and effort into it, of course, but where you invest your energy, that's where you're going to go. So the whole manifest destiny type of mindset, it is true to an extent. Like, obviously, we're not going to sit here, say we want something and just have it come to us. But if we continue to put our energy and our time and our focus into something, we will get there. And we will get there so much faster than if we just sit there and think that it's going to come to us. So yes, like, putting it out there, saying you're going to achieve something, writing down your goals, doing more things actively to actually commit to yourself is just gonna, here's what it really does. Saying those things and reinforcing it just reinforces the fact that like you are going to take action. And it's a commitment to yourself, because one of the biggest things that holds us back in reaching our goals is just standing in our own way, and is literally just saying, oh, I don't think I can do it. We self-sabotage out of doubt, out of fear of failure, fear of judgment. And then we don't reach where we want to go. But I think, where you put your energy really will pay off. And I think I've described this in another podcast, but the likelihood of success, it just increases like twofold every single time you add another layer of accountability, whether it's with other people or social media or coaches, to your likelihood of success. And when you have all the layers of success of like multiple check-ins per week and a full plan, and you've declared it to your coach and to other people in your life, that likelihood of success is like 90-something%. So, I still haven't found the graph of it, but basically you understand the gist. And I think the kind of counter thought to this is like the people who say like, I work in silence. I like to, to grind in silence, and I will not tell anyone my goals, and I'll just get there one day. And like, I love the idea of that, of like, and I used to think of this sometimes in some ways where it's like, there's girls that go to the gym in their sports bras, and you can, see their body all the time. And then there's like people like me who like, I can show up in like full sweats.
People like me.
And like, just, train and not really even look at myself in the mirror. But I think there's a balance there, because you can get motivation by like seeing where you're at and like seeing where you want to be, or like seeing your progress visually versus kind of hiding it all together. And so, I've resonated with I'll just work in silence, and one day I'll take my sweatshirt off and I'll be fucking ripped. Like, but
explicit.
Yes. But, at the same time, actually a personal anecdote, I might have mentioned this to you, Christina, but like, it just didn't even occur to me to tell anyone, 'cause like my head just wasn't there. It wasn't in it. But I started a mini cut, beginning of December, basically. And it was in preparation. Did I tell you about this?
I think you told me that you were starting one.
Yeah. Like, but it was just like, it wasn't a thing in my brain, which led to where I'm at now. So basically, beginning of December, I was like, I'm going to start a mini cut. I have an event at the beginning of January that I want to just like lean out a little bit for, just feel a little bit more confident. Didn't have a super strong why. It was just kind of like it was there and I felt like it. But I didn't tell really anyone except my coach who programmed it for me, and Aaron, who's already been dieting like alongside me for a little bit, and maybe like one other person. But I just didn't I didn't put it on social media. I was like, I'm not gonna, and the reasoning was, it came from a good place. I didn't want to perpetuate like dieting it through or after the holidays, and like, oh, Thanksgiving dinner, and then jump right into a diet after, because like I didn't want it to look like that. It really didn't come from that place. But I feel like it could be misconstrued that way. So I just didn't say anything about it. Here's what happened. It's December 29th. I pretty much half-assed the whole thing because it wasn't declared. And I'm looking back now, because today I checked in and I was like, hey, let's just cut our losses here. Like, I'm good. Like, I'm not in a position where I'm dying to make all this progress. I just like don't want to feel bloated going into this trip, because I will be in a swimsuit. But like, other than that, like, I'm fine. Like, it is totally fine. Let's just cut our losses, get back to eating good, and just get back to it. Right. And that's what happened, because no strong why, no real measurable outcome. Just like, I kind of wanted to do it. Didn't really didn't declare it to anyone, didn't put that accountability out there really. And it didn't happen. And, you know, I can attribute it to a bunch of things. I was busy working on business stuff. My head wasn't in it. But like at the end of the day, like that's a huge part of it. So personal anecdote that not a lot of people know until literally now. I was attempting a mini cut. I probably lost like 2 pounds from it. But you know, on the weekends, I just kind of like loosely tracked or, you know, took Christmas completely off, which like, yeah, of course, but I definitely ate more than I should. And, you know, just lackadaisical most weekends or meals out where I was like, oh yeah, this is tracked, but like I'm over. So yeah, it's just like, yeah, I just didn't make it a priority. So personal anecdote there of put it out into the universe and tell people. And, you know, it might seem stupid to declare your goals on social media, but it is really, really worth it.
I have so many things that I want to say based on what you just talked about. So I'm going to try to remember all of them. But I think, first things first, it's like, you know, we were talking about putting things out into the universe. So Marissa and I aren't super like woo-woo when it comes to stuff like that. And, you know, but I do think that if you put things out into the universe, you're more likely to have them come back to you. But at the end of the day, action, 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 right? Like you can't will something like, oh, I wish I had $1 million. Like, okay, well, what are you going to do to get there? You know, like you have to start taking action. But I do think it's important to speak things out, and it almost like makes them more, again, just makes them more concrete and more realistic. But when it comes to talking about things, like, I mean, if you think about it, Marissa, in your past, like if you started a mini cut, like you would document it and you would talk about it on social media. And it's almost, again, you put some pressure on you, like, right? Like, oh, people are going to be looking at me to see if I've made progress or if I haven't. I need to continue with it. I need to continue talking about it rather than just kind of like doing it. But at the same time, you didn't have a strong why. So I think there are a lot of things to be said there. And one of the things, I can't remember which part, I think, about manifesting and taking action. So you and I are both reading The Art of War, if you haven't already finished it. So it talks a lot about resistance. And
I love that book.
Oh, I do too. So, and it's a lot of actionable takeaways. But I kind of like it because it's, you know, it's like, you know, so many people never reach their potential because they procrastinate, right? Like they have all this resistance, you know, whether it's fear of failure or, you know, just, you know, oh, well, whatever I do, it's not going to be good enough, or fear of judgment, whatever it might be. And it just takes us to kind of live this like kind of not mediocre life, but like you maybe never reach your dreams. And so, forget what person it was, but they asked him like, hey, do you, I mean, he's a writer, obviously, so he has a lot of references to writers. But they're like, oh, do you write at specific times? Or do you write when you're inspired? And he was like, I only write when I'm inspired. And that just happens to be 9:00 sharp every single morning. So I really like it because it's like, you know, maybe you won't create your, you know, the best habit or the best whatever, but at least you're sitting down, you're doing it, and you're making it a habit, and you're doing it, right? You're taking action, whether it's going to be your best work or like your shittiest, but at least you're doing it. So that was one of the things that, and there was one other, I cannot remember what it was. There were so many things that you brought up, but but you know, when it comes down to like taking action, it's like, okay, you know, you're more likely to do it if you're talking to someone, if you have someone that's going to keep you accountable. And then the big thing is investing. So if you invest some sort of money, you know, not, you know, that could look different for everyone. Like $100 could look very different, from one person to the next. But if you invest and you're like, hey, I'm showing up for myself, like I'm going to do it. And you have specific things that you're going to do, like, you know, just to ensure you're staying on track, like you have specific check-in days where you're going to assess your progress and where you are, you know, how much progress you've made or you haven't, and whether or not you need to change your goals, if you need to modify, make different plans, something's not working, then, or like maybe priority shift. Like, for example, you get pregnant and you need to change some things around. Like, I think that's really important when it comes to goals, and especially with your fitness journey, is being adaptable, right? So not having these super, super rigid things that you can't change. And then, we want to talk about, well, what happens if I do have a setback, right? Like, that's kind of the big part of this podcast is like, all right, well, you set your goals, you have them, they're smart, they're super smart goals. And you have all these things and everything looks great on paper, but then what happens if you get injured? What happens if you lose your job, or, whatever it might be, whatever setback you have, like, okay, well, how do we handle those? How do we go into it and make sure that 2022 isn't like, oh, I'll just wait till 2023.
Damn, you're on a roll. I'm going to rewind because there's definitely a lot. And I do want to get into dealing with setbacks and like lulls and funks and stuff once you've started. But I think there's some really important stuff that you said in terms of, again, just like you were mentioning, like talking about your goals to someone, or like maybe you're sitting here and you're like, Marissa, Christina, I have 5 Instagram followers. I have no family around. I have 1 friend. Like, like I don't have anybody who's listening. Like, it doesn't matter. Talking about it to whoever you can, or just, even if you're posting on social media, you have 0 followers, and you're making like a accountability account that doesn't have any followers, it's private, like, it is affirming to you that you are committed to this, and it is repeating to yourself when you make a post or when you declare something. So it's not in vain, even if you're, just talking to yourself about it. And I think what you said about investing, I mean, obviously I agree. Christina really wants to say something.
Yeah, I really want to say something. So that is how I started my Instagram account back in 2014. Was just an accountability account. I didn't show my face. I didn't have anything. It was just like literally, I need to show up, and do some sort of fitness something. And it made me more likely to show up and stay on track. Not to say that you need to create a Fitspo account, but that is something. But the other thing I wanted to say earlier, which thank you for reminding me, was like, when it comes to showing your struggles or getting to where you want to go, I kind of equate it to like being like a documentary, like the whole like working in silence thing, where it's like, if you were to turn on a documentary, a documentary, and it was like some super successful person, and it's like they had this goal and then they achieved it, the end. It's like, well, what?
Like, no story.
There's no story. Like, how did they do that? Like, what was the in-between? And that's what matters the most. And if you work in silence and you just all of a sudden show up and you've achieved your goal, yeah, of course, it's super awesome. But a lot of people want to watch that in-between. And so that's why it's, it is interesting to follow along someone's journey, because you see the ups and downs, and it's not just this complete linear, like, oh, I said I lost the 5 pounds every single month and I reached it, and the end, right? Like, you want to know the setbacks, you want to know how you overcame and how you adapted, and that makes it more, there's more of that story there. So don't feel like you have to be successful every single week or every single month when it comes to your goals, or feel like someone might be disappointed. Like, they want to see how you continue to show up and how you overcome. So again, it's almost like thinking about if you had this documentary, like, what is that in between going to look like?
Yeah. No, I mean, people love storytelling and like learning through stories. And I think another thing about that is, okay, maybe this goal is just for you. Maybe it is a selfish goal of I want to look a certain way or change a certain thing about myself. But, by documenting, by sharing, even if it's just in your personal circle, who else could you potentially be helping? Right? It's not Absolutely. All, you can actually trickle down into other people's lives just by setting an example. So I love that. And I do want to go back to your point on investing, because like I said, I agree 100%. I mean, obviously I have coaches for everything at this point. But I'm going to try to explain this without putting a dollar amount on anything, just because I don't like, money's super relative to everyone. So basically, one story that we had, and, I hate when this happens, and it happens way less now since we, have worked out a lot in our systems in our business. But we had a client who probably joined on in like September, and they, they put down the money, and it's not a small amount of money for most people. But when it comes to your point on investing, it's just another way of putting yourself on the line. It's, saying it out loud to someone is putting yourself on the line. Posting on social media is putting yourself on the line. Putting your finances into it is putting yourself on the line. So the scarier that investment is, usually the better it is to actually force you to take action. I know for me, the first investment I made into my business was freaking terrifying, and it forced me into a lot of action really quickly because I was like, shit, I gotta do this. So like, it's just another method of that. And so one example of when it wasn't a scary investment for someone in terms of their actual finances, and I didn't know this, but I was following them on social media throughout their time, and they basically dropped off. Like, they did a couple of weeks and they had a bad week or two and they completely dropped off. We have not been able to get in contact with them, like, just, over and over and over again, reaching out, because we're going to comp them the weeks whenever they're ready to start, right? Here's the problem. They posted on their Instagram story maybe a week or two ago, of like a receipt or a bank statement of they basically spent more than the entire investment amount of our coaching service in less than a week on like some random stuff. And I realized in that moment, the amount of our investment for coaching just wasn't enough for that person to like be scared of like, oh, I'm not going to get my money's worth, or, feeling like they were actually putting themselves on the line with it. And for that person, that investment was something they could easily let go of, forget about, not even like blink an eye at. And, that's the unfortunate matter is like, we have that sometimes that is what forces people into action. Not always. You don't always need a financial investment to take action, but it helps. And for that person, it was kind of the opposite effect because it wasn't enough for them. And that's a really rare circumstance. So I was pretty shocked figuring that out, but I was like, it makes sense now why they totally ghosted. They don't care to reach out, redeem anything. Like it was kind of weird, but it made sense. So I wanted to add that.
No, and that's kind of what I was saying. It's like, if you invest $100, that could be like, oh my God, that's literally like my paycheck. Or it could be like, well, whatever, I make this in an hour. So it is very, very relevant. But it's kind of like, if we're a health and fitness podcast. So we talk about like, oh, if you're, setting these goals, and not saying that you have to work with someone, but if you buy a, $19.99 guide, is that really going to get you motivated and working out every single day? Versus if you invest like a couple $1,000s into a coach, you're going to probably be more likely to show up and stay on track. And like Marissa was saying, get your money's worth. And so it while you might say, well, I could do this myself, right? I could get on Google. I could do this. Well, yeah, you could. You absolutely could. But are you going to stay accountable? And are you going to show up? Again, unless you're one of those people who can hold yourself to a super high standard, most people are going to fall off at some point. So having someone by your side, walking you through, and, you feeling like you need to get your money's worth, you were, like Marissa said, you're 95% more likely to actually reach your goals.
Yeah. Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think, just in general, like, if you want to take action in 2022 towards your goals, we've got a couple of action steps, I think, to sum a lot of this up. Is one, make sure you dig deep when you're setting those goals and really get into the specifics and the SMART goal aspects of things, and peel back the layers, get into what that means to you. And then you got to put yourself on the line in one way or another, or multiple ways. It's going to make you more likely to achieve success. And like, frankly, like, this podcast is free. We actually lose money on it, technically. I don't care if you sign up with me or Christina or any other coach, but, putting in an investment to yourself, whether that's financial, energy, time, effort, you have to invest that into yourself. One or all of those four things is going to make you successful. And like, when it comes to kind of just getting through the lulls, getting through the funks, the slow periods, is what is holding you to keeping your back against the wall. You know, what is keeping you, you're never going to be motivated like all the time. Like that's just not the case. You don't get through lulls by just randomly stumbling across a bout of motivation. You keep going by staying accountable to something, whether that is declaring it to the world, if that terrifies you, investing financially, if that terrifies you, and doing something that's going to put yourself on the line to keep you going, because ultimately we're social creatures. We depend on, and unfortunately we do rely a lot on other people's approval and encouragement from others. And that's just how the human brain is wired. And while we would love to say, I'm going to work in silence, I'm going to do this on my own, I've met very, very few people who can actually do that. And I would say like one example is like The Rock. Like he trains at like 4 a.m. every morning for like 2 hours and quote unquote grinds in silence, right? But everybody knows that he does that. Like, so is it really that much of a secret? Like he has the world holding him accountable to his higher standard of like, this is what he says he does, right? So maybe it's not, he's got video cameras on him every morning. Maybe he like does train completely alone, but people know he's doing it. And if he's not doing it, like, then it's going to show in one way or the other. So that was one example where I was like, oh, people might counter argue with this, but I'm like, no, I think that's, I have to talk about this point.
You're like analyzing what you said. But yeah, so I think, you know, another thing we talk about is like being adaptable in your fitness journey and like, you know, how do we deal with setbacks? So I think it's important to, is again, like setting those expectations. Like, am I going to lose 5 pounds every single month all the time? And that's just going to be like, you know, the standard, you know, or are things going to happen? And so like, I love the idea of like progress, not perfection, right? Because it's like, if we are making progress, then that's okay. We don't have to be perfect every single day, every single week. And of course, I love when people hold themselves to a high standard, but we don't want to get into the situation where it's like, oh, I wasn't perfect, so therefore I'm going to sabotage. And so we've used this example like multiple times, like, you know, if you overeat, instead of saying, welp, I overate, so I'm just going to eat everything in my pantry. It's kind of the same thing as like, well, I have a flat tire. You're not going to get out and stab the other 3. So like, what are we going to do moving forward when we do encounter a setback? And so I think it's super important. That's why we do talk about the SMART goals, to take into consideration, like, you know, abilities, resources, what could possibly happen. So it's like, all right, what happens if, you know, I'm a mom of 2 and one of my kids gets sick and they can't go to daycare? Like, what do I do that week? Do I not do anything at all? Do I have some home workouts that I can do? You know, or just kind of your mentality towards that. Like, so yeah, maybe you can't get in a workout, but maybe this is some really good time where you can shift your focus to nutrition. You can try out some new recipes, or you can really focus on making sure that you meal prep. So just like kind of things like that. It's like, how can we shift your mentality? Like, or how do we overcome a setback? And how do we continue making sure that we're still reaching our goals and not just saying, well, now I just have to wait until next week, next month, next year.
I think one of the biggest things that I took from that is a lot of this goes back to the goal setting and the expectations that we have around our goals. What do we view as a setback, right? Because, for example, we used this example yesterday on an office hour. I thought it was great. Someone might say their goal is, I want to reduce my alcohol consumption. Maybe it's a vague goal. They don't specify it. And maybe they have that intention going into New Year's Eve. And instead of their normal 12 beers at the bar, they have 8. And they come home and they say, well, shit, I had 8 beers. I am a failure. I suck. But I think one of our best friends in dealing with setbacks, or what we may view as a setback, is perspective. What did you do the year prior at New Year's Eve? Oh, I had 17 beers. So you basically cut that in half, basically is what we're saying. And your goal was to reduce alcohol consumption. Now, could that goal have been better? Yes. And we could have probably avoided the disappointment if so. But like, if we look at that with the right perspective, we are still making progress forward. Of course, it's not perfect. Maybe perfect to you is no alcohol, which is kind of unrealistic for a lot of people. But we're making progress and we're moving forward. And so I think a big part of it is, what are we viewing as a setback? What kind of unrealistic expectations are we putting on ourselves? And that all goes back to the goals. And it all goes back to, what are we actually setting ourselves up to achieve and to work towards? And are we making that realistic, or are we expecting perfection out of ourselves and setting ourselves up for failure? Because oftentimes we experience setbacks because we are working towards goals that make us predisposed to setbacks, because like they're not realistic. They're too much. And that's what I said at the beginning, either too broad, too rigid, or too much. Oftentimes we kind of set our sights way too far ahead of us when we're just not ready for that yet. And we can get there, but it's not overnight, and we have to start with smaller steps first. So I think that's a huge part of dealing with setbacks, or just avoiding them in the first place, is really coming back to setting those appropriate goals.
Yeah. So something that you just made me think of is, I have a client who struggled with, again, that all or nothing mentality when it came to food, and specifically when it came to eating out, because she would restrict and then she'd go out to dinner and felt like, well, this is my only opportunity that I can have these bad foods. She would go crazy. She'd eat to the point where she felt sick, and then would come home and eat, more stuff in her pantry. And, she was a month or two in, and I remember her reaching out, and she said, I went out to dinner and I probably overate and ate a little bit more than I should have. But I was like, okay, well, what would you have done a month or two ago? And she was like, oh yeah, like, and it shifted things. And she's like, I may not have been perfect, but I'm still way better than where I was before. So again, it's kind of like how it goes back again, I feel like, to that growth versus fixed mindset, which we have a lot of episodes on, and we can list that in the description, because that goes way into depth on like how to view setbacks and how to view failures and things like that. But yeah, I feel like, we could go on another couple hours, but we should probably wrap it up here soon. I feel like we've talked a lot. We've made a lot of really good connections and really built off of each other. And, I think, I don't know. I don't know where else I want to take this, because, there's so many different avenues.
Yeah. No, I think what you said exactly with your example with that client is a great example of perspective being helpful. And, just that's, no matter how long it takes you to get to your goal, changes like that and acknowledging that kind of progress is what's going to get you to where you want to be long term. Even if it takes an extra month or an extra 2 months or even an extra year to get to where you want to be, if you get there eventually by celebrating these kinds of wins, then that is sustainable success. So I think always revisiting that, even if you're not perfect, even if you don't hit the goal 100%, look back with perspective. And, it could be a chance to reevaluate the goal too. It could be a chance to look at the goal and be like, did I make this too unachievable, unattainable for myself? And do I need to revisit like the next step ahead of me so that I can actually make this goal more achievable, right? So we can always look back, revise, and keep going back to those principles. But I think a big part of it, I feel like 90% of someone reaching a goal comes down to setting it and the expectations around it and the plan around it before we even start taking action. So if we can nail that down, then we can be a lot more successful in the long run, I think. But yeah, no, I love this conversation.
Yeah. And I think, again, that kind of goes into having an accountability partner, because you can have someone who can help you through those mindset like barriers that you're having, or someone who can say, well, you were here and now you're here, in helping you kind of celebrate those wins, especially if you're hard on yourself. And again, it just makes it more likely that you're going to show up. So having someone that you can kind of walk through things makes it that much, I guess, not easier, but that much more helpful.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, Do you have anything else you want to chat about?
That's all I got.
All right, guys. Well, we'll list the Growth First Fix Mindset episode in the description for you. And we hope that you enjoyed this episode and you still aren't anti-goal setting for the new year. But hopefully we've helped kind of clarify and giving you some more direction on where you can go and hopefully make your goals a little bit more achievable in this year. But again, we hope that you enjoyed this episode. And if you haven't already, make sure you subscribe to the podcast. You can find both of us on Instagram. You can find me at Christy Lynn Fit and Marissa is at Marissa Roy Fitness. Thank you guys so much for listening, and we hope to see you back next week.
Thank you so much for listening to the Barbell Lifestyle Podcast, and we hope you enjoyed this episode and learned something from it. Please remember that Christina and I are not medical professionals, so if you're going to make any changes to your exercise or nutrition routines, please consult with your doctor or medical team first. Finally, we would love you even more than we already do if you took the time to leave us a rating and review on iTunes. Ratings and reviews are how this podcast moves up the ranks and becomes accessible to even more people. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you next Tuesday here at the Barbell Lifestyle Podcast.